Welcome to Tap. I'm so happy you're with me. This is Mannah, and just so you know that this is a solo talk, and when it's an interview, I will put the name first in the title. So I hope that you check that out so you don't come here and are disappointed. But we're actually going to talk a little bit about that fear of disappointment in this one, I think. But it's just like a service, so you know, right? It's a service. So when it says a name in front, it's an interview, and I may or may not say something on my own. And when there's not a name in front, it's just gonna be Mannah speaking about some topic. And in this one, I want to check in with you around a pattern that I have alluded a little bit to in prior chapters. You can really translate it into any unconscious pattern that you may have, so I hope that you will relate this to your own situation. For me, it has been so much in the background, deeply embedded into me, that self-negation, that feeling that part of me is blocked by fear. You can call it a dilemma that induces a feeling of, on the one hand, inadequacy, yet longing to do the thing that I feel I'm here to do. And that creates such contraction at the physical level while I'm doing the thing. So I'm speaking in present time because it shows up, but it's definitely been worse in the past. That's always a good thing. I was worse before. This was worse before. Yeah. So it's obviously not just one I'm talking about. There are several parts to what's operating here. One part is connected to deeper resources, this deeper sense of why I'm here, my destiny, my purpose. And one is often called the ego, the need for control, the fear also of disappointing others. Yeah. So the question is always, will I risk that? Will I risk that you are really not pleased with me to gain a fuller life for myself? And ultimately, of course, a fuller life is not just for myself, it's also for the benefit of others. So even though right now with this fear in me, I don't think it's present right now actually, but it is when I'm interviewing, absolutely. So in that moment, and I'm feeling the fear, that's not an awesome state. It's not. It feels like I'm being humiliated in a way, as what I'm doing is clearly not measuring up to social expectations. And part of it is because I just don't like algorithms and all of that. I'm like trying to go against something. So some of it is on me, and other parts of it is just, it's just initiation. And what's going on is this judgment. Again, we could play with the idea that it's the ego complex really that's judging. So how can we recognize that? The judging, well, then it's all about me, and it's all about control, and it's all about shaming. What is an initiation process? Meaning it's an emerging. So it's not just there in complete full flower. There's an emergence here into what I want to be. And I do want to be, I'm sure you recognize this, wanting to be here more fully. And for me to be here fully, it also means that the controversial sides of me needs to be part of it. So it's only a few years ago in therapy actually that I realized I was not breathing fully, because I sure thought I was. And I was surprised by it, but it also made a lot of sense to what I was feeling internally. And it made sense to me that closing off, like in the deep the lower of my abdomen, closing that off, it would be easier for me to fall prey to addictions and also other complexes of overextension, putting too much pressure on myself without realizing before it was too late. So because I wasn't in dialogue with my own core, and that disconnection feeds all kinds of secretive behavior, or at least hidden from the bigger self. Because the bigger self, my bigger self, will intervene because I'm worthy of something better. So there is something culturally, I think, that often keeps us chained in patterns of tension in favor of achievement, the achievement culture. But this tension doesn't come cheap. It's a way of dehumanizing yourself to impress others, or even just that I don't disappoint. Even that goal is, it's really degrading how I feel, how that split off part of me might feel. And I am going to speak about me and my process as usual. I received too little attention as a child to not have that compulsion. So I will continue to speak freely about what I have experienced, but I do bring it up as a whole chapter because it's also related to a societal pathology. Okay, so I'm going to expand on what exactly this pattern is that I'm talking about, but it is that pattern that's kept me from breathing deeply into my lower belly. And like I said, the whole realization that I didn't, that's a major, major thing. So when I say that I think it's related to a societal pathology, we're always affected by the culture that we live in. We affect each other like that. And from my experiences in, both volunteer work and in social work, I have come to meet that epidemic of chronic illnesses that we're also talking about in the media, where people often in the beginning are suffering unrecognized. They don't know what it is, so we call it stress, but it is ambiguous. And also the number of autoimmune disease are rising. So I've seen this firsthand with people. My job was mainly to try to get them to go have a job, and it would just seem so mission impossible because they would have for years and years be visiting doctors and various medical institutions, and it just keeps being hard to identify the cause for these people. But the symptoms are there. Like it could be like fatigue, like a serious fatigue, and it could be, I guess, this feeling of inflammation, as if you're on fire on the inside. Many people have described their pains to me. So of course it varies, but it is very painful. And then to add, at least sometimes, right? Because that's the elusive part of this kind of sickness. The reported symptoms here wax and wane. And when you sit there as a social worker, you just have standardized filling out forms, procedures, and it's just such a poor match. You can't tell me exactly when does it hurt, because these symptoms come and go, and they don't really seem to have much of a rationale to them. So when we don't know what's making us ill, any system, any very organized system like the unemployment system here, is just gonna make things worse and make you feel like you're not understood. And systems like that tend to personalize something that should be considered a collective problem, as all of us experience being in a perpetual state of stress. Of course, it's worse when you, for example, live in a city, you have a busy job, maybe you have small children, whatever's going on, maybe you're at war, of course. But what I'm talking about is just even having a phone, okay? Just even having access to being online. It's research that our physiology alters due to that stress of modern technological life. Plus, I mean, we're busy. Most of us feel busy, and we are busy. But what are we busy doing? What are we busy doing? Shallow stuff, right? I'll try not to scream. Shallow stuff, not the soul nourishing kind, which we really have an appetite for, but some of us have forgotten it. So I feel that it's urgent and it's so important to direct our attention to what is going on inside of us. And as I said, it will vary depending on who we are and our circumstances and our upbringing, all of that. But I think we can find a collective tension on a bodily level. And this may be a projection because it happens, right, of my own, just because I feel this way, then, everyone that's the greater context is supposed to feel this way too. So that's an option. I'm going to keep an open mind about that. But what I'm talking about is related to culture as well, something like we could call it achievement culture. And it is an extreme when you deal with chronic illness where there is a lot of physical dysfunction. But even with more subtle uneasiness, and I'll describe to you, we're getting close to what I wanted to talk about in particular. But yeah, so just subtle uneasiness can become a downward spiral with, all the small but constant adjustments that we make to the body's ailment or to our unconscious strategies that keep that pattern intact. So I'm talking about something we don't notice, and yet we ignore it. Do you see? It's like, I don't notice it, but also maybe partly I'm ignoring it. And we do that unless we take time to really widen our minds so that we do let that information come in. And for me, it is a daily practice to, for example, teach my inner child not to be afraid anymore. And it's just one of many different practices that we can do. And I think someone like you listening here are well aware of self-care practices. And I don't like to give advice on here. I really don't. I mean, the more that I observe in the helping professions what works and what has worked for me in therapeutic settings, it never has to do with advice. It's like advice is missing me somehow. Advice is what someone is filled up thinking about that they want to say to me while I'm speaking. Do you follow me? So they're supposed to be listening, but I can already see in their eyes that in a little while I'm going to get a prescription for something, or I'm going to hear about this retreat that they have just attended. And it's all really well intended, right? So I'm not saying other people are doing this. I have been doing it as well, because it's so close to our hearts that we just want to pass on what works for us. But there's something about giving advice that's just, it's just the devil. That's how I grew up. When something people didn't agree with, we would just say that's the devil. It's not, of course, it's not the devil, because it's very well intended. So, but I think it's really missing the person who's there. So I'm trying to not give advice. And also, why should I? Because I don't know, like I told you, I'm in the process of this. I have recently, it's 2 years ago that I discovered this, and it's such a process. It's such a daily practice for me. So, of course, I do think that the way forward is to pay attention to ourselves, including taking time to be with what is in the present. But there are many ways of working with that. I think many of us need to activate a new relationship to ourselves, because it is so normal to have become entangled with distortions that especially comes up, I think, in relationships to others. It's about tensing up. It's like I'm afraid of confinement, and that's why I tense up, but then I confine myself inside myself. And it's not real. It's a projection into the future of something that has already happened to me. I'm sure you've heard this in trauma therapy before, this idea that we're afraid of something that has already happened. Yeah, so that's what I mean. It's not what I'm afraid about, what I'm tensing up for is somehow not real, but what happened to me as a child now shapes how I view the situation. And it's the incomplete emotions in that not feeling safe to communicate as a child that now tends to let me perceive reality in a distorted way. So it's not real. And I'm dealing with that. It's the underlying unresolved patterns of, I guess, identifying with what this child felt, being rejected, being completely missed apropos advice giving, being completely misunderstood. So as a child not feeling safe to communicate, that's a real thing. Being a child, not being safe to communicate, that's a real thing. But I'm not a child anymore, right? And that's where the distortion comes in. That remembrance that we're on a different timeline now. And what I think it is, definitely, is that it's a protection, unconsciously a protection against relational loss and existential fear in present time when it goes on. And what happens is that it narrows my experience of life. And in fact, it calls in what I'm trying to protect against. Okay, so my fearfulness does not lead to connections with other people. Let's say that's what I wanted. Let's say that I wanted a peaceful connection with you where I did not have to be afraid. And then because I'm afraid I'm maybe not good enough, I'm not worthy, I'll say the wrong thing and that it will ruin the whole thing, then I tense up. But because I'm tensing up, then that's blocking me actually from getting that heartfelt connection. It's missing the point. And it is so habitual, deeply inside the unconscious, because I get why it will come up. And in the situation, ever since I realized this, so it's only a few years ago, then I've started to remind myself in that situation to try easier, to not over effort, to not overly exert myself, which is really what's happening. But it's not a done deal then. Oh, okay. It's not like I can just think my way out of it. I've mentioned achievement culture that we have seen, I think, collectively stress people out. But in helping professionals, there's a lot of burnout experienced. And I think that's maybe a better place to talk about this tension rather than, it's an area I know more about at least. And I guess if you're interested in therapy, then you've probably held a piece of someone else's life in your hands. And what happens is that in helping professionals, we are exposed to secondary traumatic stress because we're working relationally with people who've undergone sometimes really severe trauma. So it's usually not a career performance-based, but that could absolutely cause the tension as well. But inside the therapeutic world, the social work, there's this risk of compassion fatigue, of burnout. And the many guards that I believe in know that I have been there. Guards know I have been there. I should just say it in plural. And to help oneself in that stressful place of feeling burnout, of being burned out, we look inside, right? And we see what's going on inside. Okay, I want to help. Yes, that's why you're here in that business. I want to relieve them from their suffering. Okay, yes, that's really unrealistic. And what's going on, because when we really want to just take whatever is hurting the other person, just take that away, what about supporting that person's own agency, that person's own ability to navigate life? So is it possible that I now identify with being a savior that works tirelessly to help and serve others? So I'm talking about in a situation where you've realized that you have burned out, or maybe you're close to burning out. It's all becoming too overwhelming. And then you look at, what are you identifying with in this severe impulse to help? And if you are identifying with something like that, just someone who's constantly working to serve, where does that impulse come from? Is it actually also maybe let's open up the explanations, right? But could it also be that it's hard for me to be with a caring presence when someone else is suffering? And then, because it's hard for me, then I put pressure on myself to fix it. You see, so it's all of a sudden not about the other person anymore. It's because it's hard for the helping professional. So because I attune to the deep levels of distress in the person sitting across from me, then I feel compelled to jump to whatever method, a tool, a skill, or advice I have, just so I can stop that other person's pain. But that won't help the person becoming an expert in their own internal world, in their own life. So the key here is, for your own sake, but also for other people's sake, okay? Not to put pressure on yourself, but to show up when someone is suffering with presence, with love, and then this awareness of your own inner experience. And this is, I speak from where I am, right? This is where I am. Like trying to be present to my own inner experience while I am open and wanting to help the other person. And for me, this inner experience of pressure, it's actually not with clients, not right now anyway in my life. It's not going on with clients. So just changing the scene here. But it has in the past, of course. Yeah. But right now it's not. It's more, I think it's in meeting new people that somehow could feel that they potentially have wasted their time with me a whole lot. I think that's a general pattern, that then there's pressure and fear inside. And in recent years, I've been able to feel it. I don't want to undermine that point. That's a huge thing, because I was not aware of it before. I just shut down somehow, like didn't feel anything below my belly, I guess. And I forced myself through it. Whereas when we know it, we can embrace it, right? And, Thich Nhat Hanh has a book on fear. He says that the only way to ease our fear and be happy is to acknowledge the fear and to look at its source. And then he suggests this image of the inner child, that you see yourself as your inner but also wounded inner child that needs reassurance that we are now safe. So that's again this idea that what you're afraid of already happened to you. And I think so too. I really enjoy that book. Absolutely. As I remember it, it also, it's a lot about also that, you can't take anything with you when you die. And I just tend to like that point. And then I tend to need to be reminded of that every day, often. You can't take anything with you when you die. Kind of takes the pressure a little bit off. But I also think that for me, and I'll tend to think for anyone, that there's more than one dynamic playing out. First of all, yes, I was chronically misattuned to as a child. And I have completely personalized and internalized that, as children do. And I treated myself the way that my environment did, not realizing it. Meaning looking at my behavior and blaming myself for my behavior. That's one of the patterns. Rather than understanding, the emotions behind. And supporting my inside. It's another hot topic about objectification. For example, when I was attacked for something, then I learned to attack myself for that. That is the logic, right? Rather than looking into this child's eyes, sitting down and thinking, she has the best intentions. I wonder what happened, wonder how she feels. How do you must feel really poorly then, now that because you felt like you had to do this. What's going on with that? How, creating that kind of safe space for her. So the environment didn't do that. And then you as an adult, or at least for me as an adult, I haven't done that, not created any safe space around me, but just attacking myself the way that the environment did. And now I am in the deep around becoming secure in myself as it is. And really interviewing is one of the areas of my life where I practice this big time, being aware of my internal processes. This is a place where I meet new people. You tend to interview different people, right? And just flashback into the Danish podcast. I used to interview people every week, and even in some manic periods, I published several interviews on several channels all at once. I mean, yeah, it was a lot because it wasn't like full-time job. I was an amateur podcaster next to whatever thing I was doing to earn money, right? So especially the first 2 years, it was crazy. I don't know if it's the first 2 years, first 4 years, the first, I don't know, but first few years at least, I went to great length at getting people to talk to me. So I would come to their place, no matter how many hours I had to drive to get there, or take the train to get there, or the bus to get there. And it, of course, whenever their schedule allowed for it. And plenty of times, reality sort of showed me that my strategy wasn't working, because it often was unsuccessful. and not really worthwhile, all of my efforts. Either they had forgotten, I've tried that several times, going to an address and no one's there, and oh, they forgot, but I sent you an email yesterday, and I sent you an email this morning. Oh, I'm not using that email. Okay. And different things could make, that I could get that feeling that it wasn't worthwhile. For example, if they were too busy and they didn't have a whole hour, just different things where we were definitely not attuned to each other. We didn't have the same expectations. And yet, even though it was a tragic experience, I would still, of course, spend the whole day to edit and to promote and whatever else. And what I'm saying here, so please don't hang up if you're thinking, oh, this is she's just talking victim podcast talk here. That's really the podcast life. It can be anyway. And I could do another episode on that, because that's actually not what I wanted to emphasize. What I want to emphasize is how much effort went into this. Okay, a lot. Okay, a whole lot. I didn't even talk about preparation. Anyway, but I knew that I made a conscious choice to do that. I had my reasons for doing that, and I changed along the way, and settling more and more into where, I felt that this, we had more common expectations around this, me and the people that I interviewed, So I felt, yeah, right? That's the outer effort is what made me tense. And that's the extent of the pressure. Okay, that's what I thought. And then only a few years ago, I realized I wasn't breathing properly when interviewing or when in any other interpersonal exchange. And why this comes as a shock? Well, I used to be, I was a yoga teacher, right? I was self-employed as a yoga teacher. I had created events and self-development for years, including about breath. So I was so shocked that I had not noticed this. But you can actually think about it in a quite a rational way, that the reason that I didn't discover it before is that when I do teach or when I do practice my own breathing, it's easier. It's when I'm with new people, something special is going on with that other person. It doesn't maybe have, sometimes it's not just new people. It can be people I've seen a few times. But there's still this feeling that it's new. And yeah, so it was quite the realization, because I saw it and then I could not unsee it. Meaning I started to notice it several times a day. This pattern of holding, this pattern of tensing up, this pattern of not breathing fully. And I thought to myself, what's going on? What's going on? Was I always like this? And I didn't have to ask anyone about that, because I have so many questions, and I always feel like asking people about different stuff, just curious about their opinion about it. But this one, well, first of all, it's kind of hard to put that question up to someone else, right? But also because I knew that this had been this way forever. I knew that I had tensed my way through. I had forced myself and my body, even though I was terrified, then I had just disconnected from all that pent-up energy and done it anyway. And there's so much in this that I'm saying it, I'm like, there's so much to unfold, but I think I'm gonna try not to do that. But okay. So you do something even though you're terrified of doing it. That's in itself, I don't think is a problem at all. I'm just getting a flashback to when I was at a psychologist the first time, 100 years ago, very long time ago. And I remember that it was before that, we recorded everything. So I wish I had the recording, but from memory, and I do remember this because I kept repeating it to my friends afterwards, is that I told her that how afraid I was. Before I started to interview. I had interviewed in Christian settings, but yeah, again, before sound, not before sound in the universe, but just recorded sound. Okay, anyway, I guess what I was afraid of and still did was going to events in around social work and around philosophy, things that I cared about. But it still meant, showing up in places where you were not entirely sure where to put your bike and all of those practical concerns. And then, of course, meeting new people and, of course, all of that. So that's what I talked to her about, that I felt anxious and then I felt, but I need to do it. And she told me to just not do it. She told me to just, well, then don't do what you're afraid of. And I wish that I could now talk to her about what logic, what philosophy, what theory, what therapeutic model did that come from. Because it didn't care for both sides of my internal conflict. I'm sure you hear that if you're a therapist yourself. You're like, yeah, but she wanted both. She wanted to and she did not want to. So only one of them was heard in that session anyway. So for me, it's not a problem that you're overcoming yourself and you're stretching your limits and you're doing something that you're afraid of. The problem is the way I did it, and that was by disconnecting. So at that point, when I realized this, I think I just did weekly interviews at that point. I tried different things. I addressed it with people that I was interviewing a little bit, I think. I think so, yeah. And yeah, I did different things to be easier on myself while interviewing. But things can really go to the max with me. So it turned out I just really wasn't prepared. And I was like washing my clothes just before the person got there, actually while the person got there. And so I had to stop because all the joy of it was gone. Yeah. So fast forward 6 months, I started this podcast that you're listening to now in English. And the English is because I hope that there's just more astrology interested people out there than there are in Denmark. And then the monologue part of it is because I kind of wanted to just be in my own space for a little bit. But then I've just started to miss interviewing. It is a big part of me. I'm so curious. And so I just now have to get back up. But not back up in the pressure patterns. Yeah, fear response. Wilhelm Reich, that I probably mentioned before, he had that character structure. I think he would call it armoring. It's like a muscular holding pattern surfacing when, in situation where you would put pressure on yourself. For me, it is about communicating something important to someone. I suspect that I could really disappoint someone now. There's a big possibility that I'm not going to say it the correct way. They're going to be disappointed that I don't have many subscribers. They're going to be disappointed that maybe only 3 people are going to hear this interview. All of that pressure right on my shoulders. I mean, yeah. And so I'm not sure if it's actually armoring, just according to Wilhelm Reich. That's maybe a too big of a theory to put onto this because, I don't know how it would work. Because if it's that pattern in your body, because that's very bodily based, then it would probably be there all the time. And then what I'm saying is just that on certain occasions, unconsciously, the volume is turned up on that holding pattern. So I'm not sure about the reference here. But a lot of people have studied in the way that we hold tension in our bodies, for sure. And yeah, there are so many underlying realities. And I think there's interwoven, emotionally laden themes for any pattern. I have, and when I don't have, I still intend to have a complex view of causation. Meaning I'm not looking for one origin story to this tendency inside of me to turn up the nervous energy. I want to keep it multidimensional, just like astrology is. But we can name some ideas, right, around why people would be predisposed to certain unconscious patterns. For example, like we've mentioned, prolonged exposure to trauma, leading to complex trauma. Also something like socioeconomic disadvantages. Have you heard about these studies? And because I've read like these conclusions on these studies, and it's really scary hearing about how the status of your parents affects your ability to do a number of things, to thrive really, but also to protect yourself from stress. Yeah, that's a horrible thought. I almost can't say it without being a little bit depressed. So I'm just gonna name another possible cause that's getting me excited to go back up. It could also be prior lives' impact on the psyche. I'm excited because the whole idea about prior lives, it hits a nerve in me. I light up from it, even though it's very tragic sometimes. Most of the time it's quite tragic past life stories that we hear about. It could be that someone killed you for speaking up, right? And then, yeah, some kind of wound was passed on from that life to this life around speaking up or whatever else. But now I'm just talking about, again, my tension is specifically surfacing when I have to communicate something. I think that's as close as we get to it. It could also be epigenetics, if you've heard about that, how your parents' lives and events, certain events, I think, in your parents' life shape your genetics. So it's like biologically. So these are scientific ideas. I don't understand the extent of them, but I think it's similar to the idea that you were in the womb as a fetus, and your cells recorded what was going on in your environment, which was your mother, right? So we just lie there and receive and drink, in my imagination, all that anxiety and whatever else is going on. Yeah. So whatever the cause is to something like tension in your body, whatever habit that you're dealing with, whatever the cause is, it's like when I talked about sugar, I'm doing it to myself. This thing that someone else did to shut me up. It wasn't a really nice intention. It's just like, be quiet, here's your candy. And yeah, I think you could find something very similar in different holding patterns around that. It is exploring complex trauma, I think. It's the same when I talk about religious trauma. Because in religious trauma, when I talk about it, I always, or at least whenever I remember, I underscore that I believed it, right? I make a point of saying it's not just that I did what other people were doing, because that's a superficial understanding of being in a religion. I'm saying that the bigger trauma was that I believed that it was inside of my own perception. And I think that's the same with other unconscious patterns, that we think this is the right way to live. We think it we think that it's ourselves, right? I think this. Until we then realize, no, that relentless pressure, that is not me. That was a distortion, imposed first from without and then from within, as a certain chronic psychological stress. And that's why I say that it's also a societal pathology, because it's not, you can't just say because it's going on inside of you that it doesn't have anything to do with the outside. It's certainly interwoven like that. And I don't think it's just about kicking habits. I mean, it's habitual for sure. And I think, I don't know, I am sugar-free at the moment. So I will not say that I don't believe you can kick a habit. I do believe you can kick a habit for sure. But I'm just saying, nuancing it to, I don't think, okay, let me put it like this. I don't think that I could kick the habit of sugar. I'm not talking about, you have to listen to the last monologue to completely get what I'm saying. But I'm really talking about the addiction of a whole lot of sugar. Okay, so I think you can do that if you parallel that simultaneously, work on yourself in different ways so that you have support. Yeah, because encouragingly, as a lot of what I've said might not be encouragingly, I do think that we can be, and that we are. I think that we are actually the directors of our own lives. But that what gets in the way sometimes, most times, is identity. So, like I said, there are many ways, and just don't take this as an advice, right? But if we think about, okay, this is the stress, this is the contraction that's going on right now. It's like there's something happening that I don't want. Then what's the antidote to that? Well, that's relaxation. That's a state of deep relaxation. So just to end here, maybe we could try that. We could maybe try a little relaxation, but I want it to be paired with, because you can't just relax from anything. And even when I began my journey in self-development, when people were like, oh, just let go, surrender, I was like, no, but I have real life issues. You're not hearing me, right? So I would never suggest that just relax and it's all good. You know, I am not Thich Nhat Hanh, not that he would suggest that. He's also passed, but I'm sure it's not. There's more to a philosophy than that, but sometimes it can it can sound like that, right? It can sound like you're just letting go of everything. And what I want to pair it with, the letting go, I want to pair that with self-inquiry. Self-inquiry, because I love self-discovery. I love what we can do to learn more about ourselves. So what I think is a good way is to ask yourself some questions. So tension, right? Tension is resisting something. It's pushing against something. Do we agree? Like if there was nothing you were pushing against, you would just be flowing. So there must be something, and we don't know what it is maybe. So one part of you could just be resisting this. So this practice is really arriving in the present moment and accepting what is, because that is the antidote, right? Acceptance is the antidote to resisting what's there. So the practice is simply to notice the breath coming in and going out. So you don't force the breath. And maybe you never think, but I don't ever force the breath. You know, what is she talking about? You know, I could argument like that. But so let's put it in another way. Don't do the breath. Just let's have this little minute together. So sit in a comfortable seat. Find a place where you are mostly undisturbed. And start to relax. So it's an undoing, not doing. Relax and yet be attentive towards your breath. So the essence of this meditation is that your breathing happens entirely on its own. So as you sit here, are aware of your inhale, are aware of your exhale. See if you can let the breath breathe you. So after your exhale, make space for a pause. So exhale, pause, 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 and then see if you can sense that the inhale comes on its own. And maybe if you inhale a little too soon, maybe you get this feeling that you don't entirely breathe. You didn't get exactly the satisfaction that you were looking for. So next time you've exhaled, try to wait. See what happens. You're not holding your breath, but you're making room for the inhale to happen on its own. The way that I sense it is that I can really sense it in my back, filling up. But maybe you feel the air in a different body area. So just notice, how do you sense this being filled up, being breathed in your own body and in your own body's rhythm, your body's natural rhythm. So this is all about stepping away from forcing, stepping away from trying even. We often say something like, I'm doing it as best I can. You know, that's excellent in many situations in life, but just considering that we might have taken a step too far into, well, overexertion, contraction, tensing up, holding the breath, trying, doing, achieving, all of that. Then instead of doing your best, just make room for the natural breath to come. And feel that easefulness of being breathed. When does it seem natural to take an inhale? When does it seem natural to let go? And it's really not a mental decision. It's a bodily sensation of accepting yourself, your body, your natural rhythm. So we'll end that little section here, but feel free to continue if you're inspired. You know, there are many meditations, I always say this, there are many meditations online, so but you could even do this on your own and see how that is to just relax your way through a meditation that's, I find, paradoxically very effective, right? We're not trying to be effective, but it's actually so helpful, because often we are getting in our own way. And all of that philosophy, all of those theories, you know, I will overload you with them in all the chapters of Therapeutic Astrology podcast, but it's really good to pair all of that with some meditative time for yourself. So again, I'm not advising. You can do whatever you will, and I trust that you have your own unique path, and I don't think that this is, this is just the way to do it. It's one out of many things, one out of many practices that I found to be really helpful. So just wanted to share that. And now just a couple of questions. And I think it's a sort of self-therapy. You can do this on your own. I'm a big advocate for therapy because I have finally found a therapeutic method that actually works for me. But we can be in many life situations. I also think that therapy doesn't only happen when you're actually there with your therapist. It's also in between, and at least that's a way to accelerate your therapeutic work. And I just feel like noting here that therapy is really a part of what keeps me humble. You should think maybe I have many reasons for being humble, sure, but there are so many, I call it identities. These are my words now, and not part of my therapeutic model that I'm studying. This is the combination with astrology I'm talking about here. I see it as there are many identities, and sometimes they they take over when they actually should understand a deeper message about life. And so in therapy, we have a really slow, open, honest, present time with that inner material, with that psyche of yours, of mine. So it's really a part of, I don't know if keeping it humble sounds like a good thing to you. I'm a Pisces, so it sounds like a wonderful thing to me. What I mean is it's helping me just track when I'm going into sides of me, versions of me, where I don't want to be for very long at least. And then, kind of shift that, grow into more cohesiveness and all the rest of it. Okay, time is up. So I just want to finish here. By the way, I've made it the next interview, which is with Laura Anderson. And she's a therapist and many other things. And at some point I say, I'm so happy that you're a therapist. But you have to understand, while I'm doing these interviews, I certainly don't feel I have the vocabulary available that I wish for. So sometimes it comes out a little bit funny, and I hope that when you get to know me, when you get to know my heart, then you start to understand also what it is that I'm uttering, okay? But what I was trying to say there is exactly this, that I am happy that she is a therapist, like I'm happy that anyone is a therapist, because it keeps us, I don't want to repeat myself, but some kind humble, but even just this self-examination is a wonderful concept. That's what I'm talking about. When you are examining yourself on a hopefully daily basis, or at least quite often, then you're just gonna be a better role model, and it's gonna be easier for someone else to come through to you, and for you to actually hear someone else, so it's not your own stuff, your own material, your own projections that's in the way of you actually hearing your other fellow humans. So that's it. Okay. We can use these explorative questions to shed light on internal dynamics, and I think it's a good place to be then when you have sat with your breathing for a little while, and then we can think about what stresses might be weighing on us in this moment. What stresses might be weighing on you at the moment? And have you, by any measure, left yourself? And is it important? Is it very important for you not to disappoint the person you're with? And what is that based on? Can you make that conscious? So just a little self-exploration, like what is this stress that's weighing me down? And then if you realize, it's really important for me not to disappoint the other person, then why is that? Is it from the past? I mean, of the past, but then from, I guess, this current distortion. And then when that becomes conscious, it's a whole new game. It just is. Yeah, you can really transform your internal world when you have this awareness. Thank you so much for listening to this. So we'll continue with listening to interviews next time you tune in. I'm so grateful that you're here and that you want to be part of this journey with me. So thank you for that. And I mean it when I say that I love when you're reaching out, and you can do that through the email therapeutic.astrologer@gmail.com. Let's be together again real soon, here in this place.